Ryan Carter adjusted the cuffs of his suit, trying to ignore the dozens of alien eyes watching him. As a diplomat from Earth, he was used to dealing with different species, but nothing could have prepared him for the Veltraxian royal ceremony. The room was vast, lit by floating orbs of light. Towering Veltraxians, humanoid but with blue-tinted skin and curved, obsidian-like horns, stood in ceremonial robes. Their queen, Soraya, sat on a throne of polished obsidian, her piercing golden eyes locked onto Ryan. He had been invited as a guest to strengthen diplomatic ties between Earth and the Veltraxian Empire. Everything had been going well, until one of the Queen's advisors presented a golden chalice filled with shimmering liquid. Ryan hesitated. He had seen this before in diplomatic meetings. It was likely a simple gesture of goodwill. Without thinking too much, he lifted the chalice, nodded respectfully, and drank. The moment the liquid touched his tongue, the entire room gasped. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The Queen's expression changed from regal calm to shock. The advisor who had given him the chalice stumbled backward, as if he had witnessed something unbelievable. Ryan lowered the cup, confused. Was I not supposed to drink that? The Queen slowly rose from her throne, stepping toward him with measured grace. Human, do you understand what you have just done? Ryan blinked. I thought it was just a ceremonial drink. The murmurs grew louder. Some of the Veltraxians looked amused, while others looked horrified. The Queen's lips curled slightly, but it wasn't exactly a smile. You have performed the rite of sacred union. In our culture, that means you have just married me. Ryan felt the air leave his lungs. His brain froze, trying to process the words. Wait, what? The Queen turned to her court. It is done. By our laws, he is now my consort. Ryan's eyes widened. Hold on, this has to be a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to. One of the Queen's advisors, an older Veltraxian, with sharp ridges along his brow, sighed. Intent does not matter. The ceremony is sacred. Once completed, it cannot be undone, unless the human undergoes the trial of separation. Ryan ran a hand through his hair. And what exactly does that involve? The Queen's golden eyes gleamed. Survive for 1 week in our wildest, most dangerous terrain. If you live, the marriage will be annulled. If you fail, you remain my consort. Ryan looked around the room. Every face, every eye, waited for his answer. He had no idea what kind of wilderness they were talking about, but he wasn't ready to be married to an alien queen. He straightened his shoulders. Fine, I'll do it. The Queen's lips curled into something closer to a smirk this time. Then may the gods have mercy on you, human. Ryan stood at the edge of a massive jungle, staring into the dark, twisted trees that stretched endlessly before him. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, something unnatural. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, growls, screeches, and heavy footsteps. Behind him, the Veltraxian queen, Soraya, watched with her arms crossed. You have 7 days, human, she said. Survive, and you may leave this marriage. Fail, and you will belong to me. Ryan exhaled. No pressure, huh? A few Veltraxians chuckled, but most just watched, waiting to see if the human would run in fear. Ryan didn't run. He stepped forward into the jungle, feeling the eyes of the Queen and her court behind him. Within minutes, the dense vegetation swallowed him, and he was alone. The jungle of death. The jungle was unlike anything on Earth. Massive plants pulsed as if they were alive, some releasing glowing spores into the air. The ground was uneven, covered in thick roots and razor-sharp leaves. Ryan moved carefully, scanning his surroundings. Then he heard it, a low, rumbling growl. He turned slowly. A creature crouched in the shadows, watching him. It was the size of a bear, covered in dark, armored scales. Its eyes burned red, and its mouth split open to reveal rows of jagged teeth. Ryan swallowed hard. Great, a space panther. The beast charged. Ryan dove sideways, barely avoiding its claws as they slashed through a tree like it was paper. His heart pounded. He needed a weapon. Fast. Spotting a thick branch, he grabbed it and swung as the creature lunged again. The branch snapped in half against its armor. Ryan cursed. Yeah, that was a dumb idea. The creature roared and leaped again, but this time Ryan rolled under it, grabbing a sharp rock from the ground. As the beast landed, he drove the rock into its exposed underbelly. The creature let out a shriek of pain and staggered back, bleeding black liquid. Snarling, it turned and vanished into the trees. Ryan collapsed against a tree, panting. That's one thing that wants to eat me. How many more? The queen watches. Far away, Queen Soraya sat in her royal chamber, watching the holographic projection of Ryan's struggle. Her court had assumed the human would die within hours, but already he had shown ingenuity and survival instinct. An advisor shook his head. This human is resourceful. Soraya smirked. Yes, he is. Nightfall approaches. As the sun began to set, Ryan knew he needed shelter. He climbed a tree, securing himself with thick vines. From this height, he could see glowing eyes moving through the jungle below. He sighed. 6 more days of this. Fantastic. But deep inside, a fire burned. He wasn't just surviving, he was proving himself. And the queen was starting to notice. Ryan woke up to the sound of something massive moving below him. He had spent the night high in a tree, using thick vines to secure himself, but the noises in the darkness had kept him on edge. Now, as the first light of the alien sun touched the jungle, he saw shadows shifting beneath him. A group of creatures moved through the underbrush, long, insect-like bodies with blade-like legs and glowing blue eyes. Their heads twitched as they searched for something, or someone. Ryan held his breath. If they find me, I'm dead. He carefully reached for a small stone, then threw it far into the jungle. The creatures snapped their heads toward the sound and rushed toward it, disappearing into the dense trees. Ryan exhaled. That was close. Now he had a bigger problem. Food and water. He had survived the first night, but he couldn't last a week without supplies. The hunt for survival. Ryan climbed down carefully, keeping his senses sharp. He followed the sound of running water and soon found a small river. The water looked clean, but he had no way to tell if it was safe. He crouched down, watching small alien fish-like creatures swimming. If they can survive in this, maybe I can too. He cupped his hands and took a small sip. The water tasted metallic but not unpleasant. He waited a few minutes. No dizziness, no sickness. Good enough. Now food. He found a large fruit-like pod growing from a tree, but when he touched it, the surface twitched. Ryan pulled back. Nope, not touching that. Instead, he focused on smaller purple berries growing near the river. He crushed one between his fingers. No strange reaction. No acid burning his skin. He took a hesitant bite. Sour, but edible. All right. Water and food. Checked. The queen watches. Back in the Veltraxian palace, Queen Soraya sat in front of a holographic display of Ryan's survival. Her advisors had expected him to fail by now, to panic or make mistakes. But he hadn't. One advisor scoffed. He is stubborn. I will give him that. Soraya leaned forward, studying the screen. Not just stubborn. Smart. Adaptable. She found herself more entertained than she expected. The next threat. Ryan had barely finished eating when he heard heavy footsteps approaching. He grabbed a thick branch and turned toward the sound. From the jungle emerged something worse than before, a Veltraxian warbeast. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, covered in thick black armor plates, with 3 glowing red eyes fixed on him. Its claws dug into the earth, and a deep snarl rumbled from its throat. Ryan gritted his teeth. Oh, come on. Give me a break. The beast charged. Ryan's legs burned as he pushed himself through the dense jungle, hearing the relentless snarl of the warbeast behind him. He scrambled over roots, ducked beneath low-hanging branches, and jumped over a small ravine. But no matter how fast he moved, the beast stayed on his heels. Finally, he spotted a cluster of enormous thorny plants ahead. Thinking quickly, he veered into the thorn patch, hoping the creature would be forced to stop. As he climbed through the brambles, thorns tore his clothes and skin, but he didn't slow down. The beast, however, lunged after him, and its massive bulk got tangled in the thick vines. It roared and thrashed, trying to free itself. Ryan used the moment to climb to higher ground. From above, he saw the war beast struggling against the barred plants. "Looks like you're stuck. That's what you get for chasing me," he muttered. His heart still pounding, he allowed himself a few seconds to breathe. But then he felt it, a chill in the air, as if something was watching him. Slowly, he turned his head. A shadow shifted behind him. Before he could react, he saw the glint of a blade slicing through the air. Ryan dropped flat to the ground as the knife narrowly missed him, embedding itself in the tree trunk behind him. Ryan rolled to his feet, grabbing a heavy stick. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. Another figure stepped into the faint light, a Veltraxian, cloaked in black, with a second knife in hand. This wasn't just a jungle predator. This was an assassin. The Veltraxian sneered, its golden eyes flashing. "You're tougher than I expected, human," it said in a low, growling voice. "But the Queen has too much faith in you. I'll fix that." Ryan tightened his grip on the stick. "Sorry, but I'm not planning to die today." The assassin lunged again, and Ryan swung his makeshift weapon, forcing the Veltraxian to dodge. The two circled each other in the small clearing, Ryan using his speed and the environment to stay out of reach. Branches cracked, leaves rustled, and tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. "Why even bother killing me?" Ryan asked, trying to buy time. "If I'm not good enough, I'll fail on my own." The Veltraxian laughed coldly. "You've lasted too long. It's clear now that the Queen underestimated you, but she'll learn once you're gone." Ryan's mind raced. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Someone in the Queen's court didn't want him to succeed. But why? And more importantly, how was he going to deal with this trained killer? As the assassin lunged again, Ryan took a step back toward the thorny vines. When the Veltraxian's foot caught on the brambles, Ryan swung the branch with all his strength. The stick shattered against the Veltraxian's shoulder, causing the assassin to stumble. Ryan didn't wait for a second chance. He grabbed a nearby rock and struck the Veltraxian's hand, making the knife clatter to the ground. With one final push, he threw the assassin into the tangled vines. The Veltraxian roared in frustration as the thorns closed around it. Ryan didn't wait to see what would happen next. He ran deeper into the jungle, clutching the few supplies he had left. He was battered, bleeding, and exhausted, but he was still alive. And now he had questions. Who had sent the assassin, and why were they so desperate to see him fail? Ryan sat in the hollow of a large, twisted tree, catching his breath after his encounter with the assassin. The jungle was quieter now, though faint growls and rustling leaves reminded him he wasn't alone. His body ached from cuts, bruises, and sheer exhaustion, but his mind refused to slow down. Why would someone try to kill me? He wondered. What do they gain if I fail this trial? Back in the Veltraxian palace, Queen Soraya watched the footage of Ryan's struggle in silence. Her advisors stood around her, whispering among themselves, each one eager to give their opinion. "He is clearly not fit for this challenge," one said. "The human barely survived the war beast, and now an assassin has bested him." Soraya turned to the advisor with a raised brow. "Did I miss something? From what I saw, the human defeated the assassin. Tell me again who was bested." The room fell quiet. Soraya's eyes returned to the screen. She couldn't deny it. This human had impressed her, not just with his resourcefulness, but with his will to keep fighting, even when the odds were stacked against him. "Your Majesty," another advisor spoke hesitantly, If I may be blunt, the human survival is causing unrest among some members of the court. There are those who feel threatened by him. Threatened. Soraya's tone grew sharper. By a single human armed with sticks and stones. It is not what he has now, the advisor explained carefully. It is what he may become. His resilience, his quick thinking, they are qualities that could shift the balance of power in unexpected ways. Certain factions would rather see him fail. Soraya leaned back in her throne, her golden eyes thoughtful. Could this human, this Ryan Carter, truly pose a threat to her rule, or could he be something more valuable? A different kind of survival. Meanwhile, Ryan's mind was shifting from simple survival to a broader strategy. He realized now that the jungle wasn't his only enemy. He needed to outthink whoever was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Instead of continuing his frantic escape, he began to leave behind subtle traps and false trails. He didn't have much, but he had his wits. He carefully set up a loose vine that would snap back and disorient anyone chasing him, and built a small fire at one location only to slip away quietly in another direction. By the time the Veltraxian assassin freed themselves from the vines and tried to track him again, they found nothing but confusing signs and misleading trails. "This isn't over," Ryan muttered to himself as he huddled in a makeshift shelter of leaves and branches. "Whoever you are, you'll have to do better than that." The jungle trial was over. Ryan had emerged battered, bruised, and weary, but undeniably alive. He had passed the Veltraxian's test of survival, something few believed he could achieve. As a result, he was granted a temporary reprieve, a month to remain in the Queen's palace before deciding whether to annul their marriage or stay by her side. At first, Ryan felt like a fish out of water. The Veltraxian palace was massive, its walls carved from shimmering black stone that reflected the dim glow of floating orbs. The alien courtiers, with their horns and intricate robes, stared at him as though he were a rare, curious specimen. Despite the awkwardness, Ryan kept his head high. He was assigned a small chamber, more luxurious than anything he'd ever had on Earth, complete with a soft bed, strange fruit that oozed glowing nectar, and a view of the sprawling Veltraxian city. Yet every time he tried to rest, his mind buzzed with questions. Who had sent the assassin? Was the Queen truly unaware of the plot, or was she playing a deeper game? Life in the court. Ryan soon learned that life in the palace was far from peaceful. Intrigue thrived in every corner, with whispers of alliances, betrayals, and hidden agendas. The Queen's advisors often approached him, some pretending to offer friendly advice, others barely concealing their disdain. One advisor, a sharp-eyed Veltraxian named Terran, cornered him in the Grand Hall. "You survived, human, but do not think that makes you one of us," Terran said coldly. "You are here only by the Queen's mercy." Ryan looked him square in the eyes. "And I intend to prove I deserve that mercy. If you have a problem with me, take it up with the Queen." Terran narrowed his eyes, but said nothing more. As he walked away, Ryan noticed a small smirk playing on Queen Soraya's lips. She had been observing from a distance, and for the first time, he wondered if she was testing him not just in the jungle, but here in the court as well. Winning allies. As the days passed, Ryan began to adapt. He asked questions, observed the Veltraxian customs, and started earning the respect of a few courtiers. The palace chefs marveled at his human recipes, turning his simple suggestions, roasting certain alien fruits, combining rare spices, into dishes that impressed even the most skeptical of Veltraxians. The Queen, meanwhile, kept her distance but watched him carefully. She noticed how he spoke with the palace guards, how he studied the intricate tapestries that depicted Veltraxian history. Ryan's curiosity and creativity were not the traits of a mere outsider passing time. They were the traits of someone trying to understand, trying to belong. The Queen's growing respect. One evening, as Ryan walked through the palace gardens, he found Soraya standing alone near a glowing fountain. She turned to him, her golden eyes thoughtful. "You surprise me, human," she said, Most would have left by now. Ryan shrugged. You gave me a month. I might as well learn something. Her lips curled into a faint smile. Perhaps I underestimated you. Ryan tilted his head. You wouldn't be the first. For the first time, the tension between them softened, if only a little. As Ryan walked away, he couldn't help but feel that his time in the palace wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving he could thrive. Ryan adjusted the formal Veltraxian sash across his chest, feeling out of place in the intricate alien attire. A summons from Queen Soraya's council had pulled him from his quiet studies. As he stepped into the palace's massive council chamber, his unease only grew. The room was filled with Veltraxian advisors, each one whispering in low, hurried tones. Their horns reflected the eerie blue light from the orbs above, and their faces were tight with worry. Soraya stood at the head of the table, her golden eyes sharp. She waved him over. Ryan, she said, her tone unusually direct. We have a situation. He raised a brow. A situation. Soraya gestured toward a holographic map that displayed the Veltraxian Empire's outer territories. A cluster of red symbols blinked ominously near their borders. A rival faction, she explained. They're gathering their forces. They'd been waiting for a sign of weakness. Your presence here, it's given them one. Ryan frowned. How? I haven't done anything. One of the advisors sneered. Your survival embarrassed them. You proved that a human, with no training, could overcome challenges that even Veltraxians struggle with. To some, that makes our queen look vulnerable. Ryan's hands tightened into fists, so now they're attacking. To what force her out of power? Soraya nodded. Precisely. Ryan glanced at the map again. The red symbols were creeping closer to the central territories. What's the plan? How are you going to stop them? One advisor, an older Veltraxian with deep-set eyes, huffed. This is not your concern, human. You've already caused enough problems. But Soraya held up a hand, silencing him. I've summoned Ryan here because I need every advantage we can get. He may be a human, but he's proven himself resourceful. We need fresh ideas, new strategies. Ryan blinked. Me? You want me to help plan your defense? The Queen's gaze didn't waver. I want you to tell us how humans think, how they'd fight. Our enemies know us too well. They don't understand. A bold suggestion. Ryan studied the map carefully. His experience in the jungle flashed through his mind. How he had used the environment, set traps, and avoided direct confrontations. If the Veltraxians expected to meet their rivals in straightforward combat, they'd lose. Don't fight them where they're strongest, Ryan said finally. The room went quiet. You said they're gathering at this choke point, he continued, pointing at a narrow pass on the map. That's where they expect you to meet them. What if you don't? What if you hit them from the sides, cut off their supplies, force them into territory they're not prepared for? An advisor scoffed. That's unconventional. It's smart, Soraya said, her voice firm. She met Ryan's eyes and nodded. We'll consider it. The rivals' challenge. As the council began making plans, Ryan could feel the tension in the air. The rival faction wasn't just threatening the Queen's rule. They were threatening the fragile balance of power in the region. If Soraya fell, it wouldn't just be her crown at risk. It would be her people's future. Ryan knew this wasn't his fight. He wasn't Veltraxian. But as he looked at Soraya, standing strong despite the odds, he realized something. This had become personal. He couldn't stand by and watch her fall. The Queen's forces gathered under the dim light of the Veltraxian moons. Alien warriors with blue-tinted skin stood shoulder to shoulder, their armor gleaming and their weapons humming with energy. Ryan, now wearing a light set of borrowed armor, stood among them, clutching a modified staff that could project a small energy shield. His suggestion for a surprise attack had been accepted, but now that the time had come, he felt the pressure building. Queen Soraya moved among her troops, her golden eyes scanning their faces. When she stopped in front of Ryan, He stiffened. "You're certain about this plan?" she asked. Ryan nodded. "They're expecting a head-on fight. If we hit their supply lines first, it'll weaken them before they know what's happening. When we finally engage them, they'll be disorganized and desperate." Soraya tilted her head, studying him. "It's a bold move for a human." "It's a smart move," Ryan replied. "Bold just comes with the package." She smirked slightly, then turned to her officers. "You have your orders. Move out." The ambush. The jungle, thick and hostile as always, was both their cover and their obstacle. Ryan crept along with a small unit, weaving through vines and undergrowth. The sounds of distant alien machinery grew louder as they neared the enemy's main supply camp. Ryan whispered, "Set the charges at the far end. When they rush to put out the fires, we'll hit them from the other side." One of the Veltraxian warriors grumbled, "I hope your human tactics work." "They will," Ryan muttered. As soon as the charges were placed, they detonated with a series of thunderous booms. Fires erupted, sending enemy soldiers scrambling to contain the blaze. Ryan's team quickly took advantage of the chaos, attacking from the shadows, disabling key equipment, and scattering the defenders. The main assault. By the time Soraya's main force arrived, the enemy was in disarray. Ryan watched as the Queen led the charge, her energy blade cutting through the enemy line. Veltraxian warriors roared as they surged forward, overwhelming the already weakened opposition. Ryan stayed back, providing cover with his shield and helping injured troops retreat. He wasn't a trained soldier, but he used what he had: his wits, his resolve, and his willingness to adapt. When a towering enemy mech stomped into the fray, Ryan signaled a team to flank it. Using the chaos of the battlefield, they brought it down with explosives. The turning point. As the sun set, the battlefield fell silent. The Queen's forces had won. The rival faction's troops were either captured or scattered, their leaders fleeing into the wilderness. Soraya stood on a rise, surveying the aftermath. When she spotted Ryan, she approached him. "Your plan worked," she said simply. "Team effort," Ryan replied. "But yeah, it did." She nodded, a rare moment of genuine respect in her expression. "You're not just a human. You're a Veltraxian ally now." Ryan, bruised and exhausted, managed a small smile. "Guess I'm not so out of place after all." The battlefield was quiet now, save for the faint hum of distant wind. Veltraxian warriors moved among the wreckage, collecting equipment, tending to the wounded, and rounding up prisoners. Ryan sat on a broken piece of machinery, staring at his scratched-up hands. His borrowed armor was scuffed and dented, but he had survived. Queen Soraya approached, her golden eyes as steady as ever. She carried her helmet under her arm and a faint glow of exhaustion on her face. "You're still alive," she said, a small hint of amusement in her tone. "Barely," Ryan replied, rubbing his sore shoulder. "You didn't make it easy." "It wasn't meant to be easy," Soraya replied. "But you did more than survive. You helped us win." Ryan shrugged. "I just didn't want to get killed out here. Self-preservation can be pretty motivating." The Queen's expression softened, but only slightly. "Your strategy saved lives. If we had attacked head-on as planned, we might have lost far more troops. I won't forget that." Ryan looked up at her. For the first time, he saw something beyond the regal, untouchable leader. She wasn't just the queen of an alien empire. She was someone who had to make impossible decisions every day. Someone who bore the weight of an entire people. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain, she had started to trust him. Questions linger. As the cleanup continued, one of Soraya's advisors approached, bowing slightly. "Your Majesty, the rival faction's leader has fled, but we captured several of their commanders. They claim they acted alone." "Do you believe them?" Soraya asked. The advisor hesitated. "No, their resources were too vast, their timing too precise. Someone within our own ranks likely fed them information." Ryan frowned, listening to the exchange. "You're saying you have a mole?" "It's possible," Soraya replied, her tone grim. She turned to Ryan. And that makes what you did even more important. Without your tactics, we might have been fighting a losing battle. Ryan nodded slowly, his mind spinning. A mole meant more trouble. It also meant someone within the palace still saw him as a threat. He thought back to the assassin in the jungle. Was the mole involved in that attempt on his life? And if so, how long before they tried again? A growing bond. Soraya glanced at him, reading his expression. You've proven yourself, Ryan. You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder. No one in my court will dare harm you now. He raised an eyebrow. Not to question your authority, but I've seen how some of your advisors look at me. I wouldn't bet my life that they're all on my side. The Queen's lips curved into a slight smile. Let them try. They'll learn quickly that I value loyalty. And that includes my trust in you. Her words hit harder than Ryan expected. For the first time, he felt not just tolerated, but truly accepted. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling, but it made the weight of everything he'd been through a little easier to bear. Ryan stood, brushing off his armor. So, what happens next? We return to the palace, Soraya said. You've earned a place at the table. And together, we'll find out who betrayed us. And why. For the first time since arriving on this alien world, Ryan didn't feel like a stranger anymore. He felt like someone who belonged. Back at the Veltraxian palace, Ryan stood before the Queen and her gathered court. The grand chamber, once filled with suspicious gazes, now held a measure of reluctant respect. He had proven his mettle in the jungle and on the battlefield. But now came a different kind of challenge, deciding his own future. Queen Soraya rose from her obsidian throne, her golden eyes focused on him. Ryan Carter, she began, her voice calm but commanding. You have survived trials that no human, and few Veltraxians, could endure. You have shown resourcefulness, courage, and strength. Now the choice is yours. Ryan shifted his weight, feeling the heavy gaze of the entire court upon him. The Queen's words echoed in his mind. A choice. He looked up at her. If I choose to leave, I can go back to my world, right? No strings attached. Soraya nodded once. You will be free to return to Earth. No obligations, no ties. And if I stay? Ryan asked. The Queen's expression softened, just slightly. If you stay, you will continue to stand at my side. Not as a mere consort, but as an equal partner. We will build something new together. A bridge between our people, a future that neither of our worlds could imagine alone. A weighty decision. Ryan took a deep breath. He thought about everything he had been through. The jungle's dangers, the cold glares of Veltraxian nobles, the raw fear and adrenaline of battle. But he also thought about Soraya, not just as a queen, but as a person. Beneath her sharp commands and regal bearing, she had shown him moments of trust and understanding. She had valued his ideas, respected his input, and even seemed to enjoy his company. He looked around the chamber. The Veltraxians still seemed strange to him in many ways, but he had come to appreciate their strength and their sense of honor. The warriors who once doubted him now stood tall, acknowledging his contribution. Even the advisors who had sneered at him now remained silent, unwilling to challenge the human who had won their queen's favor. Returning to Earth would mean going back to a familiar life, free from danger. But staying here meant something more. It meant creating a legacy, forging a connection between two very different species. It meant a future that, for all its challenges, was filled with possibility. The human's answer. Ryan met Soraya's gaze. I'll stay, he said simply. A ripple of surprise swept through the court. Some Veltraxians nodded in approval. Others exchanged uneasy glances, but Soraya's expression didn't falter. A faint smile played on her lips as she stepped closer to him. You've made the right choice, she said. Together, we will reshape what our people can be. Ryan managed a smile of his own. I hope you're ready, Soraya. Humans can be stubborn. And Veltraxians, she replied, her voice carrying the hint of a laugh, are no less determined. As the court looked on, two very different beings, alien and human, stood side by side. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, they were walking it together. 3/3